There were no computers at the time, at least not available, and we didn't have resources to buy them anyway. So that was a very important decision that Sachs made. Gordon Sweet, who was the director of the area for higher ed, gave us the opportunity to do that, with the understanding that they would come back every year for 5 years, and they would visit the clusters. And I said, fine. And they did that. Gordon Sweet himself, with a team that he put together, would visit the clusters every year. And as we grew, it became more difficult for them to visit their clusters every year, so they divided it up any way they wanted to. But it brought in tuition, because the principals could afford to pay tuition. So we had a source of income coming in, we had minimal expenses going out, and we were able to begin to build the university with that model. Now, at the same time, oceanography was very successful. Bill Richardson got money to do research. That was blossoming. We were building at a facility on the port. At that time, they were located in a houseboat on 15th Street, but it worked. And so that we had a successful model that was originally in our initial design. In physics, Ray Popinski was not able to get funding. He had some students who didn't pay tuition, and then finally in 69, 70, we asked him to leave, and he had brought tons of materials from the Growth Institute of Physics, which is what he was doing in the University of Pennsylvania. He brought that with box carts and all, and but we had to ask him to leave. And so he left, because after careful examination, he wasn't fundable. And without funding for that particular program, we couldn't survive. So we actually turned him loose, and we brought a germ-free laboratory in biology with Joel Warren, and that was started in Notre Dame. They moved it out, and we gave it room here, and that was fundable. And it was fundable not because of the research they were doing, but it was fundable because they were growing germ-free mice. And I can tell you that every time they opened that autoclave with the law school on the first floor and them on the third floor, all I did was get my phone ringing all the time, because the odor would go down instead of out. And the poor law students in the first year or two suffered with that at least twice or three times during their law day. So, but it worked, because the funding for the germ-free animals, which they provided as a tool, gave them the opportunity also to do research here. And now it's called the Leo Goodwin Institute, Germ-Free Institute, and it's functioning on Sunrise, and it's now back here, even though we let it go for a couple of years. So it was that background that led to Nova University producing distance education, and it was very successful. In 3 years, we had almost 30 clusters in the EDD and Ed leaders. Dr. John Ciliano, who was here as the registrar, said, why don't we do it for the community colleges, because they were changing from junior colleges to community colleges. I said to John Ciliano, I said, it's yours. Just write a concept paper. Tell me who you're going to get, who you're going to work with, etc., and I'll take it to the Sachs. I took it to Sachs. Gordon Sweet approved it, and we had another program going, a little different design. He decided he would have the same professor going back to the same cluster 3 times. Remember, in my design, each one went once, so they were able to go and handle more clusters. His design was the professors would take care of each cluster. So we had a cadre of people from the community college movement, Roach and others. And all of these people, by the way, were all renowned professors in their own organizational structure. And that was very important. because we couldn't be criticized by the accrediting agencies for not bringing first-class scholars to the clusters. So the faculty was fine. It was difficult for people to understand that all we were doing was bringing the university to the students instead of asking the students to give up their jobs and come to us. That's what we were doing. And we were able to demonstrate that the quality of program was outstanding. We were also able to demonstrate that they were able to take their particular responsibility and do the practicums in their facilities. So we didn't have to have laboratories or send them out on internships. They were able to do the work in their particular environment. So when I went to visit community college presidents and said, look, if you can put the cluster together of 25 people, potential principals or potential change agents, you have a cadre of people that have to change, that have to introduce change within your environment. So if you want to see change, put together a group. And they did that. So it was easier to recruit for the community college program because it was internal within one environment, in contrast to principals who represented areas in order to have our 25 to 30 in a cluster. And so you can see that it was a necessity, not because we were bright, we just developed a niche because we had to in order to bring in a revenue stream that would begin to cover the expenses that we had as the institution grew. And that's what really helped the institution grow. And it wasn't easy, by the way, because change in education is a very slow process, very slow. And it's slow because primarily people who come into education at that particular time were still mainly females, and they enjoyed the organization and structure because it gave them a chance to get out of school at 3 o'clock and go home and take care of the responsibilities that were feminine more so than men in the home. And they were able to go home and prepare dinner and do shopping and take care of their second job. So they didn't want to change. For them it worked. And the culture, it helped in the culture as well. So it was very difficult to encourage them to give up and take on other responsibilities because that meant more hours. Even though it meant more money, it was a very difficult burden for females. It's still difficult, by the way, to produce change in public education, as you know. It's not easy. So we now have a charter movement that's forcing change where they're allowed to force change. And many of their changes are no better than what's going on in a public school. In fact, worse. Worse because they don't have all the peripheral support that you have in a public school in addition to teaching classes. So it's good because some of them are successful. It's a way for the public schools to examine what they're doing, even though charter schools are public schools, but they've got a little more freedom to produce change. But as I looked at that particular movement, if public schools pick up what's going on, charter schools may not last. Maybe a period, and then eventually the public schools will emulate the positives that they see in the public schools.